The phantom patient, many years ago in Oxford. A young doctor was working the night shift in a small rural hospital. It was a quiet and eerie night, with only a few patients in the wards. As the clock struck midnight, the doctor received a call from the emergency room. A paramedic informed them that they were bringing in a critically injured patient who had been involved in a car accident. The doctor quickly prepared the operating room and assembled a team of nurses to assist. However, when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics were carrying in a lifeless body, covered in a white sheet from head to toe. They explained that the patient had succumbed to their injuries on the way to the hospital. Despite the paramedics' insistence that the patient was already deceased, the doctor felt an unusual sense of duty to check for any signs of life. The team unwrapped the sheet to examine the body and, to their shock, found the patient was still breathing faintly. They immediately sprang into action, trying to revive the patient, but it was too late. The doctor later learned that the patient had indeed passed away at the scene of the accident, before they were transported to the hospital. The cause of the miscommunication between the paramedics and the hospital staff was never fully understood. In the days that followed, the doctor couldn't shake off a strange feeling. They started seeing glimpses of a figure in the corner of their eye, even when no one else was around. Sometimes, they heard footsteps in the empty hallways late at night when all the patients were resting peacefully. The most chilling part was when the doctor began to notice the phantom patient lying in one of the empty beds at night. The figure appeared as a translucent, lifeless form under the covers. Whenever they approached the bed, the apparition would vanish into thin air. Over time, the doctor confided in their colleagues about the eerie occurrences. Some of the hospital staff claimed to have experienced inexplicable events themselves, further fueling the belief that the hospital was haunted by the spirit of the patient who had briefly returned from the other side. Despite the fear and uncertainty, the doctor continued to work at the hospital, trying to rationalize the experiences. Eventually, the sightings of the phantom patient ceased, but the story lingered as a haunting reminder of the unexplainable and the mysteries that sometimes surround the medical profession. Note: while the story is presented as true and has been shared among medical professionals, the veracity of supernatural events is subject to personal beliefs and interpretations. The disappearing patient. Several years ago, in a small, remote hospital, a young doctor was working the night shift alone. It was a quiet evening, with only a few patients under their care. One patient, in particular, stood out, an elderly woman who was admitted for severe pneumonia. The doctor checked in on the elderly patient frequently throughout the night, making sure she was comfortable and receiving the appropriate treatment. However, during one of the rounds, the doctor noticed something odd: the patient's bed was empty. There was no sign of the elderly woman, and her belongings were still in the room. Puzzled and concerned, the doctor immediately alerted the nursing staff, and they began searching the hospital. They combed through every floor, every room, but there was no trace of the patient. The hospital was securely locked, and no one recalled seeing the patient leave. As hours passed, the staff grew more frantic, fearing the worst. They contacted the patient's family, who rushed to the hospital, distraught and confused. The family confirmed that they hadn't taken the patient home, and there was no indication that she had left the hospital of her own accord. The hospital administration called the police to report a missing person. The entire medical staff, along with the police, continued the search both inside and outside the building, but it seemed as though the elderly woman had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and there was no breakthrough in the investigation. The case baffled everyone involved, and rumors began to circulate among the hospital staff. Some whispered that the hospital was haunted, and the elderly woman had become a victim of a ghostly presence. Months later, with no leads or clues, the missing person case went cold. The hospital staff was left with lingering fear and unease. Some staff members claimed to have heard strange noises and seen shadowy figures, especially near the room where the elderly woman had vanished. Despite the passing of time, the mystery of the disappearing patient was never solved. The hospital added extra security measures, but the unsettling feeling persisted. To this day, the case remains open, and the hospital staff continues to wonder what truly happened to the elderly woman that fateful night. Please note that while this story is based on accounts that have been shared among medical professionals, the truth behind supernatural occurrences is often subjective and speculative. The haunted hospital wing. In a remote and isolated town, there was an old hospital with a long and dark history. One particular wing of the hospital was rumored to be haunted, and stories of eerie occurrences circulated among the staff for decades. Dr. Emily, a young and ambitious doctor, joined the hospital and was assigned to work the night shift. Her colleagues warned her about the haunted wing but dismissed it as mere superstition. Driven by her passion for medicine, Emily shrugged off the stories and focused on her duties. One night, during a particularly stormy evening, Dr. Emily received a call to attend to a patient in the haunted wing. Despite the unsettling tales, she knew she had a responsibility to care for the sick, so she gathered her courage and made her way to the dark and dimly lit hallway. As she walked down the corridor, a chilling draft brushed against her, sending shivers down her spine. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the foreboding atmosphere. Dr. Emily tried to keep her composure and entered the patient's room. The patient, an elderly woman, was lying in bed, weak and frightened. She told Dr. Emily about strange occurrences in her room, the feeling of being watched, objects moving on their own, and whispers in the dead of night. The old woman pleaded with Dr. Emily not to leave her alone in the haunted wing. Determined to be rational, Dr. Emily reassured the patient that it was probably just her imagination playing tricks due to the stress of being in the hospital. She administered the necessary treatment and stayed with the patient for a while to offer comfort. As the night wore on, Dr. Emily couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. She heard faint whispers and footsteps echoing through the hallways, even though the wing was supposed to be vacant. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air felt thick with an unknown presence. Trying to dismiss her growing fear, Dr. Emily continued her rounds, checking on other patients in the wing. But the strange occurrences persisted. The medical equipment seemed to malfunction without any explanation, and the temperature fluctuated drastically within minutes. During one of her rounds, Dr. Emily caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure at the end of a long hallway. She approached cautiously, but the figure vanished into thin air. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a cold sweat on her forehead. As days turned into weeks, Dr. Emily's unease only deepened. She avoided the haunted wing as much as possible, but she couldn't escape the eerie presence that seemed to follow her even outside the hospital. One night, after a particularly disturbing encounter, Dr. Emily decided to investigate the hospital's history to uncover the truth behind the haunted wing. She delved into old archives and spoke with longtime staff members who had witnessed the strange events. To her horror, Dr. Emily learned that the wing had a dark past. Decades ago, it had been the site of a devastating fire that claimed the lives of several patients and staff. Since then, there had been numerous reports of unexplained phenomena and ghostly sightings. Armed with this knowledge, Dr. Emily couldn't shake off the feeling that the spirits of the deceased were still lingering in the hospital, trapped in a state of unrest. The souls of those who had suffered in the fire seemed to be seeking solace or resolution, and Dr. Emily couldn't ignore their presence any longer. She started researching methods to help spirits move on and find peace. With the support of the hospital administration, she invited spiritual advisors and conducted rituals in the haunted wing to cleanse the space and offer prayers for the restless souls. As time passed, the eerie occurrences gradually diminished, and the haunted wing became a little less foreboding. Dr. Emily's efforts seemed to have brought some comfort to the tormented spirits, and the hospital staff noticed a change in the atmosphere. Though the haunted wing remained a place with a tragic history, it became a reminder of the importance of compassion and empathy in the medical profession. Dr. Emily's experience taught her to approach her patients not only with medical expertise but also with a deeper understanding of their fears and vulnerabilities. To this day, the hospital continues to function, and Dr. Emily's story serves as a cautionary tale for new medical professionals, reminding them of the responsibilities that come with working in places with dark histories. The case of the unidentified parasite. In a rural village, a team of medical professionals set up a temporary clinic to provide much-needed healthcare services to the local community. Among the medical volunteers was Dr. Samantha, a seasoned physician known for her expertise in tropical diseases and parasitology. During one particular visit to the village, the medical team encountered a young boy named Miguel who presented with a mysterious illness. He was feverish, weak, and had unexplained rashes on his skin. The initial examination didn't reveal any clear signs of common infections or diseases, leaving Dr. Samantha puzzled. As the days passed, Miguel's condition deteriorated rapidly, and his symptoms became more severe and alarming. He complained of intense abdominal pain, and his skin took on a sickly pallor. Dr. Samantha suspected that Miguel might be infected with a rare parasitic disease but couldn't determine the specific parasite responsible. Despite her best efforts, the standard tests for common parasites came back negative. The medical team was baffled and decided to send samples to specialized laboratories in the city for further analysis. While waiting for the results, they administered supportive treatment to alleviate Miguel's suffering. During this time, strange events began to unfold in the village. Residents reported seeing shadowy figures lurking around the clinic at night, and some claimed to hear eerie whispers emanating from the woods. The atmosphere in the village became tense, and fear spread among the locals. Meanwhile, Miguel's condition continued to worsen, and he became delirious, speaking incoherently about a haunting presence that tormented him. Dr. Samantha wondered if Miguel's mental state was a result of his deteriorating health or if there was something more sinister at play. Finally, after days of anxious waiting, the lab results arrived, revealing an unsettling discovery. Miguel was infected with a rare and elusive parasitic worm that had never been documented in that region before. The parasite was extremely difficult to treat, and the prognosis was grim. As the medical team tried to manage Miguel's condition, they continued to hear reports of paranormal occurrences in the village. Some locals claimed to see apparitions near Miguel's home, and a few even asserted that the boy's illness was caused by a malevolent spirit seeking vengeance for past wrongdoings. Dr. Samantha was torn between her scientific training, which sought rational explanations, and the inexplicable events unfolding before her. Despite her skepticism about supernatural forces, the villagers' conviction in the presence of malevolent spirits left her unsettled. Tragically, Miguel's condition continued to worsen, and despite the medical team's best efforts, he succumbed to the parasitic infection. The young boy's death cast a dark shadow over the village, deepening the residents' belief in the malevolent spirit's presence. In the weeks that followed, the medical team packed up their clinic and returned to the city. However, the memory of Miguel's case and the eerie events in the village haunted Dr. Samantha. She couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the story than medical science could explain. To this day, the case remains unsolved and serves as a chilling reminder of the mysteries that can sometimes elude even the most skilled medical professionals. It remains a topic of discussion among the medical community and a cautionary tale about the unknown and unexplained in the field of medicine. The haunted medical facility. In a small town, there was an abandoned medical facility that had been shut down for decades. The building had a dark history, having served as a hospital during the early 20th century. Stories of neglect, mistreatment, and tragedy were associated with the place, and it had earned a reputation for being haunted. One night, a group of adventurous urban explorers decided to visit the abandoned facility. Among them was Emily, a medical student intrigued by the history of the place. She was determined to explore the building and perhaps uncover some forgotten medical artifacts. As the group ventured inside, they were immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere. The corridors were dimly lit, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The walls bore the remnants of old medical posters and signs, reminiscent of a bygone era. Emily, eager to learn more about the facility's history, separated from the group and ventured into a room filled with old medical equipment. As she examined the rusted instruments, she couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling of being watched. It was as though an unseen presence lurked in the shadows. As Emily continued exploring, she noticed that some of the doors creaked open and shut on their own, despite the lack of drafts. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and a chill ran down her spine. Still, she pressed on, determined to unravel the secrets of the abandoned medical facility. In one of the darkened rooms, Emily found a stack of old patient records scattered across the floor. Intrigued, she began reading through the medical notes, discovering tales of suffering, tragedy, and unsolved medical mysteries. Some stories spoke of unexplained deaths and patients who vanished without a trace. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the building became increasingly oppressive. Emily's unease intensified, and she felt as though an unseen force was guiding her through the haunted facility. She could hear faint whispers and soft footsteps, even though no one else was around. Feeling overwhelmed by the eerie occurrences, Emily decided to rejoin her group and leave the abandoned medical facility. As she made her way back through the dark corridors, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was being followed. Back outside, Emily shared her experiences with the group. To her surprise, others also reported hearing strange sounds and feeling an inexplicable sense of dread during their exploration. It seemed that the abandoned medical facility had lived up to its haunted reputation. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the eerie experience. She researched the history of the old medical facility, delving into archived records and speaking with local historians. The stories she uncovered were even more chilling than she could have imagined. According to historical accounts, the abandoned medical facility had a troubled past. It was plagued by allegations of patient mistreatment and unethical medical practices. Rumors of dark experiments and the disappearance of patients added to the building's haunted legacy. Emily's experience at the abandoned medical facility stayed with her forever. It served as a haunting reminder of the darker side of medicine's history and the importance of treating patients with compassion and empathy. While she couldn't explain all the eerie occurrences that night, the experience taught her to approach her future medical career with respect for the past and the unknown. Thank you again for joining us for another video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below and let us know what you would like to hear in the near future. See you all again soon.